everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are going to do a quick, or as quick as I can manage, wrap up of all the books that I read in the first 3 months, so the first quarter of 2024. There are some kids playing outside who are like yelling every once in a while, and Merlin is in here, and this is the first time I have tried filming since I've had him, like doing a sit-down video, so I'm not sure if he's gonna behave himself, so hopefully there aren't too many sounds or distractions as we do this. But I have not been keeping up on my monthly wrap-ups, which I knew might happen, but still, we're all the way to June and I haven't done a wrap-up yet this year, but been very busy, and also since getting my dog Merlin, I just have not been reading as much and not had as much time for filming and editing and everything. So we're doing it now. And since I haven't been reading nearly as much as I normally do this year, wrapping up an entire quarter shouldn't be too difficult, because there are some months where I read nothing or read like one book. So we're gonna wrap up January, February, and March reading. So starting out in January, I read 4 books. Actually, 3 of these books are in a vlog. So I recently-ish did a reading vlog that was kind of a second installment in my Exploring Sci-Fi series. I am trying to continue that series of vlogs. So I won't go too much into detail about these because I have an entire vlog talking about 3 of these books. But the first book that I read in January was Mem by Bethany C. Morrow. It was a reread. It is a speculative novella. It's kind of sci-fi. It is, I guess, like low sci-fi, if that's like an equivalent to low fantasy, where it's an alternate history with one advanced technology. It's not like, you know, space travel, aliens, planets kind of sci-fi. But it is set in an alternate history 1920s Montreal, where they've developed a technology where they can remove memories from people's minds, and those memories take the form of a mem, which is a duplicate of the person that memory is coming from. But the mem is usually only able to live that one memory on loop. They can't interact with the world around them. But the main character that we're following is a mem who, for some reason, is different from all of the others because she is able to interact with the world around her. She's able to create her own new memories, and she's pretty much able to live as a regular person. And she has been doing just that for the last few years when she is recalled back to the facility where they create these mems. And so we're following her as she is trying to figure out, like, why was she recalled, and in the process is learning more about how this technology was created, what it does, some of the consequences and impacts of it. And we're also following her through this journey of discovering her identity. It really is looking at the impact of memory on identity. This is a little novella that I recommend to people pretty frequently because it is short, but I think it is very thoughtful. I think it does a good job of building character in a short period of time. It asks some interesting questions. It is, as I said, a novella, so it can't go super in-depth with things, but for what it's trying to accomplish, I just think it does it really well. And I think I give this one 5 stars again. I also read Cetaganda by Lois McMaster-Bujold, which is the next book in the Vorkosigan saga. This is her very long, like 14-book sci-fi series where we are primarily following Miles Vorkosigan. This one I still gave, I think, like a 3.5 stars to, but it is one of the ones I've liked best in the series. I've rated most of them either 3 or 3.5 stars. But I think what I liked about this is that Miles is kind of finally in a different stage of life, where now his ability to kind of sniff out trouble, get himself into trouble, and then strategize and charm his way out of it is actually an asset, and it is part of his job now. And I kind of enjoyed that aspect of it, that he really is getting to capitalize on what are his strengths as a character. I also read The Last Hero by Lyndon A. Lewis. This is the third and final book in the First Sister trilogy. I started the trilogy last year. In December, I read the first 2 books. I just sped through them. So I really wanted to make sure I continued on with the series quickly. I wanted to just binge the whole trilogy, finish it out, and experience it like as a whole. So I read the final one in January. In this series, we're following multiple characters on different sides of this like centuries-long war between 2 primary sides, but then there's also like a rebellion going on. The series is often, like the comp titles are The Handmaid's Tale meets Red Rising, which I actually think is a really good comp title and like descriptor of what this series is like. Very often I think comp titles like do not really work out, especially when you're comparing books to like really big names like that. But I feel like that gives you a pretty good feel for what the series will be like. It is fast-paced, but there are also some really interesting characters. I think for me, this final book was maybe my least favorite in the series, but I still gave it a 4 stars. The first book I gave 5 stars, the second book I gave 4.5, and this final one I gave 4 stars. So even though they have each kind of gone down a little bit each time, it's still a really solid series that I really enjoyed. The thing for me that made it not stay up at like a 4.5 was that I felt like there wasn't enough time put into the interpersonal relationships and dynamics between characters, not because the author couldn't do it, but they just didn't put their focus there. In the first book, there were some really interesting character dynamics. I loved the relationships and what little we got to see of those dynamics between characters. And I think Lyndon A. Lewis can do a really great job of writing these really interesting character dynamics. But I just wanted to see more of it. In the later books, you know, the first book, we're following all of these characters as they kind of converge at one moment, and then from there they all diverge again in the second and third books, and it isn't until like the end of the third book that they come back together. And I just really wanted there to be more time for these characters to come back together, to reconnect. It may not have been like all happy reunions, but I really wanted to see those dynamics because I think that the author can write them really well and make them really interesting, but they just didn't lean into that, didn't capitalize on that part of the story, and that's really what I wanted. I think that the world and the plot were all really interesting, but I just wanted more of those character dynamics. I had to replace the battery, so things might look a little bit different, but to round out my January reading, the other thing that I read was The 6 Deaths of the Saint by Alex E. Harrow. This is actually more of a short story. It's not a full book. It's very short, but I really enjoyed this. It reminded me that I really love Alex E. Harrow's writing. I read The 10,000 Doors of January from her a few years ago, and I remember really liking the writing in that book as well. The premises of her books don't always appeal to me, like the one that she has about witches. That just doesn't really appeal to me, but I am interested in is it Starling House? So I might read that at some point, and this has kind of like gotten me re-interested in her writing. But 6 Deaths of the Saint, I'm not really gonna explain what happens in this. It is kind of Lady Night vibes, which is what I was looking for at the time. But her writing is always just so like beautiful and evocative. I think she did such a great job in such a short, like it's a short story, of building character, getting you, invested in characters so that the story could be like heart-wrenching by the end. I wish that there was more to this story. Like I would read an entire book of this. And that's not always always the case with short stories. I think that it worked as a short story. So, you know, it is a complete story in itself, but I think that an entire book of this would be fantastic and I would 100% read it. I really wish that she would write more just like straight up fantasy, because I would love that and I would read it. Then in February, I only read one book, which was Mislaid in Parts Half Known by Shauna Maguire. This is the most recent book in the Wayward Children series. I think it's number 9, but this is a series of novellas that follow children that go into portal worlds that are perfectly suited to their personalities, but sometimes they get kicked out of those portal worlds and they end up at the home for wayward children, where they are able to, you know, either readjust to the world or wait for their door to open or just live there amongst other kids who get it. As much as I've enjoyed this series, I've kind of enjoyed it less and less as it has gone on. This one was not one of my favorites. I listened to it as an audiobook and I definitely liked it more as an audiobook than I have been liking the more recent books physically reading them. So I think there's only going to be one more in the series. I probably will listen to that as an audiobook as well, because I think I've discovered audiobook is the way to go for me with the series. Also, this book has dinosaurs on the cover, and as many people have said, there's very little dinosaurs in this for that to be like a selling point on the cover. I'm not a huge dinosaur person, so I was not like greatly disappointed by it, but it's really not that focused on dinosaurs. Apparently I gave this 4 stars, which surprises me at this point, because I would have thought it was more of a 3.5, but 3.5 to 4 stars. Then moving on to March, I actually read quite a few more books in March. I was really trying to get back into reading. So first up, I read What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. This is another novella. It is a sort of horror. It is a sequel to What Moves the Dead. There we go. Which I read a couple years ago, I think, and I really liked What Moves the Dead. It was just very, you know, not scary, but had a little eeriness to it, which I enjoyed. And What Feasts at Night, I think it was just unnecessary. I think that it doesn't have the unique elements that made What Moves the Dead work so well. It didn't have the same like eeriness, the same like just anything. I don't know. It just felt unnecessary. I didn't really like it that much. And I gave it 3 stars because like it wasn't terrible, but I also was just like, why? And then I read a bunch of contemporary romance because a lot of times if I'm trying to get out of a reading slump, that is my go-to tactic, is read contemporary romance. So I listened to these all as audiobooks and I just binged the Bergman Brothers series by Chloe Leese. So I read the first book in the series that I don't remember the name of a couple of years ago, and I liked it but didn't really like think about it that much. It was fine. And then when I was looking for contemporary romance to read to like get out of this reading slump, I just remembered that series and I was like, I'll give it another shot, you know, see how it goes. So I read the second book, really enjoyed it, ended up just binging the entire series, and it was fantastic. So it is a 7-book series, I think, and so I read 6 of those books. The last one I read in April because it came out at the beginning of April, but I'm just gonna count it with all of this because I just want to talk about the series as a whole. One of the things that I really like about this series is that it has representation in it for like disability, neurodivergence. Pretty much all of these I think involve at least one neurodivergent character, most often an autistic character, but there's also at least one book, maybe more than one, that also has ADHD. And that's something that I have found I often really enjoy in contemporary romance, is when they have representation like that. In this series, we are following a family. So there are 7 siblings in the Bergman family. Each sibling gets their own book, gets their own romance. It's called the Bergman Brothers. 5 of them are brothers, and then there are 2 sisters, and the sisters do get their own books as well. Many of them are like sports romance or sports adjacent because it is a very sporty family. But I'm gonna just go through these pretty quickly and just talk about them, and then I'll tell you kind of my ranking of them. So first up, I read, starting with the second book, because I had already read the first one a while ago, is Always Only You. Also, these names are terrible and very confusing because they all sound the same. But the first one, Always Only You, is kind of a sports romance following a professional hockey player and his PR manager who get together, and I really enjoyed that one, and that is the first one that I read and kind of motivated me to read the rest of them. Then there's Ever After Always, which follows the oldest sister in the family. This is actually like, she is already married, has been married for a while. She and her husband are trying to get pregnant, but it's not like working, and it's just putting a lot of like stress on their marriage. And so this is like just very different from the rest of the series because it is a lot more about the like difficulties that they're having in their marriage and them trying to kind of piece things back together. So this was one of my least favorite in the series, not because it wasn't good, but because it just was very different from what I wanted at the time, because I was looking for more of that like fun rom-com, like falling in love, to just sort of motivate me to read. This one just has a lot more like emotional baggage to it, and was more stressful to read because it was about them trying to like repair their marriage. So it was less favorite, but that was just because it wasn't what I wanted to read at the time. Then there is With You Forever, which was one of my favorites, maybe because it's one of the less sporty ones, but we were following I think this is the oldest brother, Axel, in the family, who is an artist that like lives out in like a cabin in the woods, and a family friend goes to stay with him kind of by accident. She feels like her life is maybe falling apart and she needs to just like stay somewhere else. She ends up having to stay with him, and he's very like quiet and reserved, and she is very bubbly, and this was one of my favorites in the series. After that is Everything for You, which is a male-male romance. This is very much a sports romance because they are both on a soccer team together. They're professional soccer players. And this one, also one of my favorites. So like the least sporty and most sporty ones apparently are my favorites. My memory card ran out of space, so I had to replace it. I have not filmed in a long time and I am really struggling to just make this one video. Anyways, I think that I was talking about Everything for You, which this one, now, okay, I have not watched this show, but this really feels like it is fan fiction of the show Ted Lasso. So this really reads like it is fan fiction about, I think their names are Roy and Jamie, if they got together. As I said, I have not watched Ted Lasso. I have watched many clips of it on YouTube, and after reading this, I questioned people that I know who have watched that show. I asked them a lot of questions about the characters to be like, am I understanding what's happening here? But it really reads like it is fan fiction about those two characters, like what if they got together. It is very like grumpy sunshine. Honestly, I feel like a lot of the books in this series have kind of a grumpy sunshine dynamic to some extent. This one is like much more upfront about it. And then after that is If Only You. This was the other sister, so this is the youngest sister in the family. In this one, she is a professional soccer player, and it is her romance with this guy who is a professional hockey player on her brother's team. Essentially, she has this sort of like good girl image that she wants to change up a little bit. He has a bad boy image that is getting him into trouble and he needs to change up. And so she's like, here's the plan, we date. I did not really like the execution of this one, mostly because it just felt kind of melodramatic. There was something about it that just felt like over dramatic in a lot of situations. And maybe it was because he had this very like angsty bad boy, like I'm not good enough for her, like I'm too broken and like she's too pure, like I don't know. There was something about it that just didn't work for me. And then the last book, which actually just came out in April, is Only in Forever, which is my favorite in the series. I love this one so much. It is following the brother Vigo, who has been like, he's so in everybody's business throughout the entire series. He reads romance novels and he's like he's very much a romantic, and he pushes romance novels on all of his brothers, being like, you have to read these, they'll help your relationships. He is so in everybody's business all the time, and he's just so funny. Anyways, in his book is the last one, and he is starting a bookstore, and it is a romance bookstore. He's trying to do it all on his own. He doesn't want to put burden on any of his family, but he needs help. And so when he encounters a family friend, or it's kind of like a friend of a friend, who also needs help with something, they strike a deal. So I think her name, is it Tallulah? She is a like mystery author, and she is very much not a romantic. She does not really believe in romance, but she is trying to write a domestic thriller where the relationship between husband and wife are central to the story, and the relationship just isn't working right on page. And so they strike a deal that she will help him to get his bookstore up and running if he will help her write the relationship between these characters for her book. And then of course they fall in love, and like they're delightful. This is absolutely my favorite one in the series. And like Vigo is just such a fun character, and I love their dynamic together. There are things about both of them that I found very relatable at different points in the story. Vigo, it has ADHD, and I really liked the way that they incorporated that into the story and how it was represented in this. This was just fantastic. One of my favorite things I have read this year so far. So my ranking for these, Only in Forever is obviously #1, the best. After that is With You Forever. Then third would be Everything for You. After that, I think would be Always Only You. Then whatever the first book was, I don't remember what the first book was. And then I'm conflicted as to whether Ever After Always or If Only You is my least favorite. I don't remember which one I liked least, but those are definitely like at the bottom. So that's my ranking of the Bergman Brothers series. So that is everything that I read in the first 3 months of 2024. I would love to know if you have read any of these or how your reading has been going. I know we are far past the first quarter of the year, but how, you know, if you care to think back to the beginning of the year, how did you kick off the year for reading? What was your first book of the year? I'd love to know, or just how your reading is going in general. But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.